My golden child sister got everything. I got ignored, until I took revenge on my own wedding day. On my 10th birthday, my parents gave me the same gift they always did. Nothing. Jessica, of course, got a diamond bracelet just for existing. That was the day I realized I wasn't their daughter. I was their mistake. I was born into a family where love had limits, and I was not included. From the moment I could understand words, I knew I was unwanted. My sister, Jessica Parker, was the golden child, the miracle, the pride of our parents. Richard and Susan Parker never hid their favoritism. Jessica was a gift. I was an afterthought, but that didn't mean I didn't try. I tried to make them see me. I tried to be good. I tried to be better than Jessica. None of it mattered. On my birthdays, the cake was always Jessica's favorite flavor. If I protested, my mother would blink at me, all fake innocence. "Oh, honey, I thought you liked this too." Christmas gifts? Jessica always got the newest, shiniest things. I got something small, if I got anything at all. Whenever we fought over toys, who do you think got blamed? Jessica only had to say I was wrong, and that was enough. My mother didn't ask questions. She didn't care. "Emily, don't be so difficult. Let your sister have it." Family trips? If Jessica wanted to go somewhere, we all went. If I wanted something different, the answer was always the same. Jessica doesn't like that place. Even on my own birthday, the whole family went where Jessica wanted. At first, I didn't understand. I thought Jessica was just better than me. Prettier, smarter, more lovable. That's why they chose her, right? But as I grew older, I could no longer lie to myself. Jessica didn't have to be better than me. She didn't have to be smarter or kinder. She just had to exist, and that was enough for them. When Jessica accused me of something, they never needed proof. If Jessica said I was guilty, they punished me without question. If I accused Jessica, they scoffed. "Oh, Emily, stop being so jealous." Even when I had proof, they found a way to twist it. Jessica's punishments were light, hers were excused. But me? I had to learn to be a better sister. It didn't matter what I did. If I cried, they called me dramatic. If I was quiet, they called me sulky. If I defended myself, I was disrespectful. So I stopped. I stopped arguing. I stopped hoping. I became a shadow in my own home. But there's one thing they don't know. I may be silent, I may be forgotten, but I will never forget. One day, I will take back what was stolen from me. When we were children, Jessica ignored me, treating me as if I didn't exist. But everything changed when we became teenagers. She had no friends, not because she was shy or misunderstood, but because she was selfish, cruel, and controlling. No one wanted to be around her for long. I, on the other hand, had friends, people who genuinely cared about me. Jessica despised that. At first, she pretended it didn't bother her, but I saw the way her expression darkened when she caught me laughing with others. I noticed how her jaw tightened when someone waved at me in the hall while passing her by. Jessica couldn't stand being second to me in any way. She had spent her entire life believing she was superior, but now I had something she didn't, and that was unacceptable to her. I was no longer just a shadow. Now, I was her target. Jessica knew exactly how to turn the situation in her favor. She had perfected the role of the innocent, obedient daughter, and my parents believed her every word. "Emily is hanging out with the wrong crowd. You should stop her before she ruins her life." Emily is so selfish. Why can't she stay home and spend time with the family like I do? With just a few carefully placed lies, my freedom was stripped away. Every time I made plans, Jessica whispered something to my parents, and suddenly, I wasn't allowed to leave. If I argued, I was rebellious. If I protested, I was ungrateful. My friends eventually gave up trying. I was cut off, isolated, trapped. But not everyone turned against me. Our extended family, our aunts, uncles, and cousins, still treated me with kindness. Unlike my parents, they saw me as a person, not a disappointment, and that, I later realized, was something Jessica would never forgive. It all came to a breaking point at a family gathering. My cousins invited me out, but I already knew the answer. I smiled bitterly and told them the truth. I'm not allowed to have friends because Jessica doesn't have any. I hadn't meant to say it out loud, but once the words were spoken, they couldn't be taken back. The adults overheard. The whispers spread. And suddenly, my parents were being confronted. Why isn't Emily allowed to have friends? Are you seriously punishing her just because Jessica is lonely? For the first time, my parents had no excuses. They were humiliated, forced to face their own favoritism in front of people who wouldn't blindly agree with them. I wish I could say everything changed after that, but it didn't. That night, when we got home, I was punished. "How dare you embarrass us like that?" my mother hissed. "Lying just to make us look bad?" A full month of grounding. No phone, no internet, no books. But they never tried to isolate me as completely again. They couldn't risk another scene. Jessica didn't forget what happened, and she definitely didn't forgive me. She demanded to switch schools, and of course, my parents agreed, even though it meant paying higher tuition. Maybe she thought a fresh start would change things, that she would finally find friends, finally be admired the way she believed she deserved. But even in a new school, Jessica was still Jessica. She could change her surroundings, but she couldn't change who she was. Eventually, she managed to gather a group of people around her, but even as she built her new social circle, she never stopped trying to tear mine apart. She invited her friends over, using them as an audience for her cruelty. They laughed at her jokes when she mocked me, played along when she accidentally spilled drinks on my homework, and smirked when she took my things and claimed they had always been hers. But when I tried to bring my own friends over, I think Emily's friends stole something. "Mom, I don't feel safe with those people in the house." One accusation was all it took. My parents didn't question it. They never did. My friends were banned. Another piece of my life, taken. But Jessica wasn't done. She wanted to ruin everything. The first time I had a boyfriend, she decided he should be hers. She dressed in tight clothes, leaned in too close, laughed at jokes that weren't funny. When he rejected her, she ran to our parents, eyes wide, voice trembling. He made me uncomfortable. They believed her instantly. My father was furious. My mother was horrified. "You need to break up with him, Emily. We won't allow someone like that near this family." I pleaded, I begged. It didn't matter. My relationship was over before it had even begun, and when I found someone new, she did it again. Another false accusation. Another forced breakup. By the second time, I stopped arguing. What was the point? No matter what I said, no matter what proof I had, my parents would always believe Jessica. That was the moment I stopped believing in love. Jessica's cruelty grew. My parents' blindness deepened. But they didn't see what was happening underneath it all. They thought they were breaking me. They thought I would always be weak, always be silent. But they were wrong. I wasn't that helpless little girl anymore. I had learned patience. I had learned how to wait. I had learned that revenge isn't about anger. It's about control. Jessica thought she had won. My parents thought they had everything under control. They had no idea. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. When Jessica graduated high school, my parents threw a grand celebration, showering her with praise as if she were some kind of prodigy. The reality? Jessica barely got accepted into a mediocre college, with no scholarships and an unimpressive academic record. But that didn't matter to them. They were still unbelievably proud, ready to pay her full tuition without hesitation. I had 1 year left before my own graduation, and I told myself I wouldn't expect fairness. But some foolish part of me still hoped. Then one day, my mother called me into the living room, her face unusually serious. "Emily, your father and I have put all our money into Jessica's education, so there won't be anything left for you." She said it so gently, as if she expected me to nod and accept it without question. "You should get a job after graduation. If you want to go to college, you'll have to wait until Jessica finishes." I froze. I had known they wouldn't treat me equally, but to hear them say it so plainly was still a punch to the gut. "And if I want to stay home in the meantime?" I asked, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. My mother shrugged. "Then you'll need to pay rent, and for your own food, and utilities, of course." They weren't just refusing to support me. They were pushing me out entirely. I asked about student loans, but my mother immediately shut down that idea. "We don't want you making reckless financial decisions. If you want to go to college, you'll have to get our permission first, and we'll decide which school is worth the debt." They weren't just abandoning me, they were trying to control me, even as they threw me away. But what they didn't know was that I had stopped trusting them long ago. All those years when they locked me inside, stripped me of friendships, and controlled every part of my life, I had spent that time preparing. I had poured myself into my studies, knowing that my future depended entirely on myself. And while they were busy worshiping Jessica, I had been working in secret. I had applied for scholarships. I had filled out applications alone, without their help, without their knowledge. And I had won. But I didn't tell them right away. Instead, I made my announcement publicly, through a carefully crafted post on social media. A message of gratitude, thanking my wonderful family for raising me, thanking my relatives for their support, and announcing that I had been awarded a full-ride scholarship to a prestigious university. At first, my parents were thrilled. They went around bragging to their friends, telling everyone how their daughter had received an incredible opportunity. But then, Jessica found out. Jessica, who had never been the best at anything, who had always expected me to be beneath her, realized that I had succeeded in a way she never could. She lost it. If I can't survive college, how the hell will Emily? She raged. She's going to fail. She's not independent. She'll be back home in no time. She poisoned my parents with doubt, twisting their excitement into concern. Suddenly, they weren't proud anymore. Suddenly, they questioned me. Are you sure you want to go? It's going to be really hard without your family's support. Maybe you should reconsider until Jessica finishes school. They wanted me to doubt myself. They wanted me to fail before I even started. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I looked them in the eyes and told them the truth. I'm leaving, and I don't need your permission. And then I walked out the door. For the first time in my life, I was free. College was a new world, one where Jessica didn't exist, where my parents had no control, where I could breathe. I worked hard, I built friendships, and for once, I lived. Jessica, on the other hand, she dropped out, couldn't handle the coursework, couldn't handle the real world. She slithered back home, where my parents welcomed her with open arms. No rent, no responsibilities, no expectations. They never once told her to pay her own way like they did with me. But I knew this wasn't over. They weren't done with me yet. And I had no idea that the next nightmare was already waiting for me. When I met Daniel Carter, I realized he was unlike anyone I had ever known. He was fearless. He didn't bow to authority, didn't tolerate injustice, and never let an insult go unanswered. Where I had spent years swallowing pain and waiting for the right moment, Daniel struck back immediately. He wasn't just the man I loved. He was the man who was ready to fight for me. And when my parents found out about him, they made the biggest mistake of their lives. They didn't care who Daniel was. They didn't care about his character, his successes, or the way he treated me. The only thing that mattered to them was Jessica. That was when they made their absurd proposal. We'll cover all the wedding expenses, my mother said sweetly, but only if Jessica gets married first. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It never came. What? I finally said. Jessica is the eldest. She deserves to walk down the aisle first. It would be unfair for you to get married before she does. I almost laughed. The sheer insanity of it. They were willing to pay for everything, but only if I put my life on hold. Again, for Jessica. I expected Daniel to be furious, but he didn't get angry. He smiled. He didn't refuse. He didn't argue. He simply nodded and said, "Of course." That sounds reasonable. I almost choked. But when we were alone, he turned to me, eyes gleaming with something cold and dangerous. "We're going to play along." "Why the hell would we do that?" I asked, still stunned. "Because," he murmured, "they think they're in control, but they don't realize they just handed us the perfect way to ruin them." That was when the plan began. We played our roles well. Daniel won my parents over, pretending to be the obedient future son-in-law. He nodded along as they talked about how Jessica deserved this, how it was only right that she got married first. Meanwhile, I acted like I was disappointed but willing to wait. Then we began our real work. Jessica had no serious boyfriend, no prospects for marriage, but we encouraged her. Daniel, ever the manipulator, planted the idea in my parents' heads that a grand wedding would make Jessica feel better about her failures. It worked. They started pressuring her to find someone, anyone, and once she did, That's when we really set the trap. Jessica wanted luxury. She wanted extravagance. She wanted a wedding that would make her feel superior to me. So we pushed her toward the most expensive choices. We made sure every dress she tried on was almost perfect but not quite, forcing her to demand custom tailoring at an outrageous price. We guided her toward a venue that was just beyond my parents' budget, but still possible if they stretched themselves thin. Every time my parents suggested a budget-friendly alternative, Jessica threw a fit. "Do you want me to have an ugly wedding? Do you want me to be embarrassed?" she would whine. "If you could pay for my education, you can pay for this." And they did. They poured money into her dream wedding, believing it would be the ultimate triumph. They were blind to the fact that Daniel and I were the ones pulling the strings. Meanwhile, my parents tried to sabotage my own wedding before it even started. They suggested the cheapest options for everything: the ugliest dress, the dullest decorations, the cheapest venue. They assumed Daniel and I would be grateful for whatever scraps they threw at us. We played along. We let them believe they were winning. What they didn't know was that Daniel and I had already secured everything ourselves. They had no real control over our wedding. They were just distractions, puppets in their own game. And then came the final step: the security. Daniel and I anticipated everything, every cruel trick, every last-minute scheme they might try to pull. We arranged for private security at our wedding. We made sure our vendors were people we personally trusted, and we prepared for the moment when everything they had built for Jessica would collapse. Because it wasn't Jessica's wedding day that would be remembered. It was the day of judgment, and they never saw it coming. The night before the wedding, everything was quiet. Jessica was glowing with excitement, convinced she would be the first to walk down the aisle in the grand wedding our parents had paid for. My parents were satisfied, believing they had won, thinking Daniel was on their side. They didn't suspect a thing. I let them think that. I didn't question their absurd demand. I didn't complain. I simply smiled, nodded, and let them believe they were in control. Because a clever hunter never warns its prey before the kill. The morning of the wedding, I woke up calm. Not nervous, not anxious, just ready. Jessica was floating on air, unaware that everything she thought was hers was about to be ripped away. My parents were whispering among themselves, exchanging smug glances, fully convinced that their plan had worked. Meanwhile, Daniel played his role to perfection. He approached them, feigning concern. Emily might be upset, but she knows better than to make a scene. He sighed as if he were reluctantly admitting something personal. She won't do anything stupid. My parents nodded approvingly, fully reassured. They thought they had won. They thought today was about Jessica. They were wrong. The venue was packed, filled with guests waiting for the ceremony to begin. My parents stood near the entrance, eager for the moment Jessica would walk down the aisle. Then, it happened. Jessica, beaming in her white dress, stepped forward, only to be stopped at the door. A security guard blocked her path. "Excuse me, miss, but your name isn't on the guest list." Jessica froze, blinking in confusion. "What? That's ridiculous. I'm the bride's sister." The guard remained unmoved. "I'm sorry, but you're not on the list." My mother rushed forward, voice sharp with panic. "This is Jessica Parker. Let her in." The guard's response was calm, professional, but absolute. "There is only one bride today, ma'am, and she's already inside." Jessica's face twisted in disbelief before contorting into pure rage. "You can't do this. This is my day." My father, veins bulging in fury, stepped forward. "You will regret this. I'll call the police." The guard remained unfazed. "You're welcome to call whoever you like, sir, but I am simply following my contract." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Then, from within the guests, one of my friends, planted for this exact moment, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Why is the father of the bride storming out before the ceremony?" Silence. Then a ripple of realization swept through the crowd. My father's face paled. He finally understood. They had been played. Daniel stepped out from the venue, walking slowly toward them. The mask of politeness was gone. He no longer needed to pretend. He smiled, a slow, sharp, victorious smile. "Oh dear," he said mockingly. "It seems there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Did we ever actually agree to let Jessica walk down the aisle? Jessica's breath hitched. She looked at him like he had just stabbed her. You lied, she shrieked. You said you would help me. Daniel raised an eyebrow, tilting his head slightly. Did I? If I did, I suppose you'd have some proof of that, right? A text? An email? Anything? Jessica's mouth opened and closed. My parents stood frozen, their minds scrambling for something, anything, to hold on to. But there was nothing. No evidence, no promises, no leverage. They had built their entire plan on blind trust. And now, they had lost everything. The silence didn't last long. Whispers rippled through the crowd, growing louder with every second. Did they really try to hijack the wedding for Jessica? How pathetic. Unbelievable. My father tried to regain control, raising his hands in a weak attempt to quiet everyone, but no one was listening anymore. My mother sobbed dramatically, clutching at her pearls like a grieving widow. Jessica sat on the floor, her pristine white dress pooling around her as she screamed, kicked, and pounded the ground like a toddler in the middle of a tantrum. They had lost. They just hadn't accepted it yet. The messages started pouring in later that night. Jessica's first text came with pure venom. You ruined my life. Then another. Daniel is a two-faced snake. And another. He'll betray you too. You'll see. One day, he'll leave you just like you deserve. Daniel read them without a trace of emotion, then calmly took a screenshot. Without a word, he sent it to the family group chat. See? She still hasn't learned a thing. Silence. Then, one by one, the replies started coming in. Unbelievable. She has no shame. After everything? She still thinks she's the victim? My parents tried calling me, but I let the phone ring until it went silent. Then Daniel, ever the strategist, sent one final message to the group. Everyone, please help us keep my in-laws and my dear sister-in-law far, far away. Emily and I would love to enjoy our honeymoon without being harassed by lunatics. The response came almost instantly. Don't worry, we won't let them near you. I had won. For the first time in my life, they had no control over me. No power. No leverage. No way to twist the narrative in their favor. But I knew them too well. Jessica had never learned how to accept defeat. My parents had never learned when to stop. Sooner or later, they would try again. But this time, I would be ready. And if they ever dared to come for me again, I would make sure it was the last mistake they ever made.